He awoke from his daydream at his desk, a cold coffee to his right and a painful crick in his neck from where he had been lying awkwardly. Whoa, how long had he been out? Had the day been that draining? He glanced down at the book that lay open under his hands, and realised he had been reading his grandfather's old books again. Must have dozed off trying to figure them out, he thought, laughing a little, but he slowed as he actually realised he understood what was on the page. Wait, I can read this and understand it now? He picked the book up and pulled it close to his face. The page was talking about phase differences and multi-phase windings, and he understood it. Finally, he shouted at the book. I get it! And he began hurriedly flicking through the book to be sure. And sure enough, each of the pages he chose had their secrets unveiled to him, the writings of his grandfather finally sinking into his brain. Perhaps the years of poring over them meant his mind had finally given up on the evasion of learning just what they had to say. But he could now, and it was, to him at least, amazing. He rushed from his office and down the corridor, passing the small workshop and other office that was on his way to the stairwell. He had to see Joe and tell him. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned and pushed open a door and headed down a corridor, slapping the book into his hand and examining its spine as he walked. He was, for the first time in a long time, happy with his head. At the large double doors he pushed his way through, turned again, and headed down another flight of steps and finally into a wide corridor littered with crates and gas bottles. This was Joe's domain, where his private workshop lay. He had ensured Joe had whatever he needed for, as his partner, and he had furnished the hands of the team with the best tools he could obtain within his means. Not to say that Joe hadn't also brought his own to the workshop for convenience, but a machine shop needed more than a handful of tools, and he was more than happy to supply whatever he could justify to Joe. He turned the book over in his hands again and headed for the workshop door. Yes, he had to tell him. Finally, he might be able to lend a hand and understand what he spoke to him about, instead of the knowledge just floating away whenever Joe stopped, akin to a child being told about calculus before they could even comprehend counting to 10. He could hear Joe working with metal from the door as he reached it, the familiar sound of pedestal drill as it squealed through the metal plate or block. He must be working on something, he thought, as he pushed one of the heavy doors open. Joe had his back to him, sparks flying from the lowering drill as he entered. The smell was strange, but not unusual, and he knew it meant he was working with an alloy they had been developing for custom projects. It always had a special smell when heated, almost like burnt oil. As he raised the drill and examined the piece, he turned and hit the stop on the drill. And as it span down, he realised he was not alone, and jumped a little at the surprise. "Marco, you'll be giving me a heart attack, son," he said, smiling as he clutched his chest mockingly, letting his machine part drift to the desk as he knelt, simulating a fall. Marco laughed as he waved the book at him. "Apologies, Joe, but I have good news. Amazing news. I can understand it." Joe looked at him, frowning as he drew himself back up and eyeing him as though he were under suspicion. "How's that again?" Marco moved quickly to him, his hands flicking to a random page. "Here, read it to me," he said, smiling. Joe slowly took the book and nodded as he noted it was one of the ones he translated years ago. He looked at the page and turned to another, and slowly read to him about the intricacies of a motor, only for Marco to finish his words off, and then continuing to explain how the motor functioned, and how it was wound and wired. As he started to talk about the phases and cycles of waveforms, Joe stopped him. "Took you long enough," he said slowly, a little saddened, or so it seemed, closing the book and passing it back to Marco. "Your rest must have really been all you needed, eh?" Marco nodded, then asked, "Rest?" Joe nodded as he turned his back to pick up the piece he had placed earlier on the workbench. "You came down to see me, said something about working on a new prototype. Then you looked like you were going to pass out. And then you did. You recovered but had the lethargy about you, and wouldn't let me call for help. So I got you back to your office and a coffee, and you said you just needed to rest. I figured it was the heat and lack of aircon down here. Joe waited as he finished, his head lifted and half-turned, listening for him to respond. Marco sat heavily in a chair and sighed, noting to himself the stuffy, metallic air. Air filtration, of course. He had to get that sorted. Wow, I must have been out of it. I don't remember any of that. I do remember coming down here to see you for... He paused and tried to remember, but he really couldn't at all, before asking, Did I hit my head or something? Joe breathed a sigh of relief and turned to him smiling. Yes, a little. Perhaps mild concussion would explain it. I did say you should get it checked out, but you were insistent as always. Marco sighed and rubbed his temples. I know. I can be such a pain to be around at times. I hope I didn't break anything when I was, here at last. Joe shook his head. No, all is fine. And you look well enough now, he said, his face near his as he was looking into his eyes like some kind of mad optometrist. He waved his eyes at the scrutiny and laughed. Okay, I get it. Crazy Marco. He grinned, adding, But that bump helped me, I think. As somehow I now understand, he said, as he tapped the book. I'll never be another you, but maybe I can be a better me. It should help no end, surely, for me to have an understanding of where and why and how things need to be. To aid in prototyping, right? Joe nodded as he eyed the book, and as he nodded his glance shot across the room to a tarp-draped machine. Yes, I'm sure it will, Marco. Enjoy your newfound knowledge. And he waved to him as he turned back to the workbench. Marco shouted as the drill span up again. Thank you, Joe! And he headed back to his office, rubbing his temple as he did. Maybe this headache was from the knock, he thought. By the time he had hit the second flight of steps, it had vanished, his head clear once more. Once back in his office, he settled down to reading the book thoroughly for the next few hours, to practice his new comprehension of what had eluded him for so long. Joe waited for Marco to leave the room, listening for the sound of the external door swinging closed and the telltale footsteps on the stairs echoing. He left the drill spinning as he turned slowly, saying, He remembers nothing. Why is that? The air replied, He is different from you. His mind is damaged, broken, fractured. Joe moved to stand in the centre of the room, looking all around. You said he was perfect. One who could understand. To speak with you. Is not the fact we speak to you enough? It's not that. You directed me, guided me. Hell, you even told me his name when I was a child. How could you have known that? Why him? What are you not telling me? He cried into the dimly lit racks of pots and tools. You were enough, as were the others back then. We needed you to listen, so we could help you to help us realize a way to communicate with you all. Your actions have made this possible, as did the actions of the old father's father, of the one you call Marco. You were all needed, and you all did well. Joe stood, his arms hanging limply by his sides as he listened, understanding. So you were never actually a friend to me. You just wanted me to build the antenna. For what? And to what end? The voice was silent as Joe began pacing around, his mind slowly conjuring imagery of madmen being led away from the old room he had known a lifetime past. To what end? He yelled. So that we can come to you, Joe. So we can come to all of your kind. Joe's blood ran cold as the voice finished. He rubbed his hands to take away the numbness that was kicking in, and moved over to the tarp, flinging it back to reveal the universal antenna. You are coming to us all, as in travelling here. He asked this as he slid into the seat awkwardly and positioned his hands where he had always done so.
Yes, Joe. That was always the plan.
But how can you? You do not even exist here, do you? You are 1 trillion or more light years away. He glanced at the controls to double-check he had the right settings. He was sure he had, so these had to... Wait, the disc. The 7th disc. What was wrong with it?
What is it, Joe? What's wrong?
The voice said, in an almost mocking tone. The disc! His hand was shaking as he touched it. It's not right! It's...
The disc is correct, Joe. It is as we asked you to make it.
No, you don't understand. It is wrong. It is not the same as the original machine had, nor the one I made and placed here. It is pitted and notched. It has patterns and...
As we said, it is as you were told to build it. The old machine was destroyed, and the pieces we had made by the hand of the Father's Father were removed. We could not travel to you through that machine. Merely exert our voices. And so we did, and ensured that the new machine would be crafted.
Joe stared at the disc as it vibrated discordantly with the others, throwing off the prior harmony of the machine's vibrations.
This new machine, your creation from our guidance, was built to perfection with the parts from the Father's Father, from the old machine, and the material we needed in the head of the one you call Marco.
You did what? Joe said, his anger rising as he climbed from the seat.
Oh yes, his wondrous alloy, his discovery. It was gifted to one who worked to create the previous machine, before the one you knew of, nearly 200 of your years prior. They passed this knowledge on to the Father's Father, as well as their own son, a chemist, a metallurgist, in your war times, I believe. And in old books he discovered whilst learning, Marco found them, improved upon them, and made them his own.
Joe began to shake with rage as he held on to the cast frame for support, feeling his strength begin to wane as the truth began to dawn.
Yes, Joe. We constructed this pattern many years before your kind knew the secrets of controlling electrical power, so that we may give your kind our knowledge. Our alloy is special.
The voice paused for a moment before continuing, but not into the calming tone he had been accustomed to, but instead a cold, malevolent one.
So very special, Joe. It is made of things unheard of even to your fledgling race's knowledge, and we ensured that it would be found and recovered, extracted and refined, and fall into the hands of those we needed to.
He fell to his knees, grabbing the sides of his head with both hands, shaking it slowly, crying as he mouthed the words, "No, no, no," over and over.
But thanks to you and your efforts, and the Marco, offspring of the Father's Father, we had you craft your machine, your universal antenna, to our specifications. And now, as things are set in motion, you cannot prevent us from reaching you. All of you.
The disc! He somehow found the strength and looked up to the dim ceiling, one hand pointing to the disc, the other outstretched in a pleading fashion. Why? What?
You fool! The disc is made of our design, not yours, crafted from our reimagined alloy. As it is
So, you are not the ones I spoke with? Joe asked, his voice hoarse and straining against the assault of the voices as they emanated around him, fighting to stay standing against the pressure. The voice let out a blast of horrific laughter, stunning him as he swayed in its vibrations.
They are beyond your reach now, Joe. Yes, you did once hear them, but one of ours was shown the machine had new parts fitted, and took the place of that old machine. Our plan is coming to fruition. We subverted it for our own, and now they lie beyond your reach. This antenna can never reach them. It is only for us now.
Joe sank to his knees in resignation. It had never been true past those first few times. He knew that now. He remembered their kindness, their support, their nurturing nature. And then the repair had taken place. The upgrade. From that point on, the strangeness had begun, and not too long after he had been prevented from using the room or being in contact with the machine. This was when they had taken over, subverted the operation, twisted its use. The old voices could have never hurt him, or others, and he had always been told that it was due to the new signals being discovered and used. The fact was, it was whatever this voice was, whatever it represented, taking over. It was they who had given him the names, the information, the knowledge of what to do, where to go, who to seek out. They had even given him dates and times and told him he should find Marco, not the old voices. And they had been doing so with countless others, including the grandfather whose books he had translated. He had been their puppet, as had so many others before him, and he felt hopeless. It was all hopeless.
Do not despair, for we shall arrive soon, Joe, and your beacon will guide us in, keeping our path open. We could never have done it without you, and do not be concerned about what will happen, or life after we arrive, for you will be the first to know our touch, to carry our truth.
Joe found himself unable to move, his blood running so cold he thought he would freeze, his limbs becoming heavy and unresponsive.
We will be with you soon enough, Joe. You just relax and take it easy. You've had a long day.
He began to feel his limbs becoming stiffer, and as he tried to move it was though he were forcing his way through water. What are they doing to me? The voice laughed as he struggled to his feet, straining against the unseen force trying to hold him fast. He looked to the machine, and then he saw it. There was something new to the machine, something that had not been present till very recent times, and not the disc that had changed. None of this had transpired until the battery had been implemented. That had to be the missing part, the part they needed to somehow warp the machine's vibrations, to alter the disc. The disc had been fine prior, and he had even tried to tune it using the other disc to the voices, but there had been just emptiness, as without this battery, whatever it was, those other discs just did not function as intended. So they had ensured that he would build it as needed, discover he could not reach the voices by tuning to them, thereby setting the disc, and then upon discovering and attaching what had been missing, they had already primed his need to dial the voices back at the first opportunity. And he had done it. But that meant they wanted that battery. No, they needed it to be able to exert control, or to come to them, to him. So if he removed the battery... He had been standing uneasily, propped up by the car frame, slowly losing strength. But as he reached this conclusion, he smiled. He found a surge of strength from deep within him, adrenaline mixing with the waters from the spring of this new hope, and he dived into the seat, reaching across the dash and grasping the battery. It flashed with a yellow light and arced strange energy from it that wrapped around his arm painfully. But no, this battery was coming out. For For Marco and everyone else's sake.
Joe, leave it where it lies, Joe.
The voices said calmly, and as Joe yanked it free from its recesses, the voice screamed out, and the pressure in the room felt as though he were under hundreds of feet of ocean for a brief moment, and then quiet. But as he breathed a sigh of relief, he noticed the battery was still arcing about his hand, travelling up his arm, although with much less power, refusing to let his hand unfurl as his muscles spasmed erratically before locking his hand closed. He tried to pry his fingers open but could not, and then he felt it in his other arm. A cold, piercing, needle-like pain, as though pricked with a syringe, and he felt a cold numbing begin to move up toward his neck. He panicked and glanced about, realizing there was nothing here that could help him, and started toward the doorway that led to the stairwell. He found he had recovered his capacity for movement again and turned to the first flight of steps, trying to grab the rail as he moved. But he had forgotten about the battery clenched hard in his hand, and instead slammed his clenched fist into the wall as it bounced off the handrail, twisting his wrist painfully, and stopped for a moment to catch his breath and grasp the injured wrist. The cold hit his neck and spread into the base of his skull, and he slowly felt the worst ever brain freeze, as whatever it was crippled his thinking. Internal pains racked him, blocking the pain from his wrist as it overwhelmed, and forced him to stop everything and try and shake it off. Seconds later it slowly left his skull and drifted to the left of his neck, travelling downward across his shoulders, and he felt able to move again. He took a few pain-deep breaths and looked back to the workshop before he continued up the stairs. As he reached the top he felt his chest begin to grow heavy, his heart literally aching, and he spurred himself on, gasping for breath as he bounced off the wall and staggered down the corridor, his heart growing ever heavier as he moved, growing colder as he found his movement slowing. He fell hard against the base of the next steps, his shoulder smashing into the wall, leaving a far heavier indentation than it should have. He was getting heavier. It was not just his lack of energy making him feel heavy. It was quite literally himself, and as he pulled himself from the plaster and placed his weight on the first step, he could hear the creak of the beams underfoot. He had to reach Marco, quickly, before something happened to him, to warn him of what was happening, of what he had done. He picked his way up the wooden stairs as fast as he could manage, taking care not to fall through them as they cracked and splintered under his motion. I guess my next job will be replacing those, he thought as he urged himself onward, Marco's office now in sight. The pain was becoming unbearable, as he felt other parts of his body slowly numbing and becoming cold. It was spreading, and it was killing him, of that he was sure. His vision wavered as he focused in on the office door, and then he blinked to try and clear the distortion. Not that it helped any. He was there, almost there. Drawing himself up, he took several deep, painful breaths, each racking him with more agony as his vision began to narrow. It was now, it had to be, or else he would never make it. The staggered walk became a scramble as he bounced off a wall, steadying his trajectory, and then became a sprint as his vision tunneled and began to fade. He reached the closed door at full tilt, blindly smashing into it as he found his vision had almost gone. But he had made it. He had to tell him. He had to warn him.